Cryptic Radio.
I, Amelia, have always been drawn to enigmas that defy logic and reason. Since childhood, whispered legends and secret histories have captivated my imagination. Yet nothing compared to the allure of the infamous Winchester Mystery House. For years, I had read accounts of its labyrinthine corridors, odd architectural twists, and the restless spirits said to wander its halls. But nothing could have prepared me for the night I received a mysterious invitation, a summons that would change my understanding of reality forever. It was a stormy evening when the package arrived, concealed within the pages of an old, leather-bound journal that once belonged to my late grandmother. The note inside, penned in an elegant, almost otherworldly script, beckoned me to the mansion with promises of revelation and danger. Sealed with an unfamiliar crest, the envelope stirred in me both an irresistible curiosity and a shiver of trepidation. Was this a fated opportunity to glimpse secrets of the past, or a trap set by forces unknown? I remember that night vividly. The relentless patter of rain against my window, the distant grumble of thunder, and the overwhelming sensation that something monumental was about to unfold. My heart pounded as I hastily packed my essentials: a worn notebook, a favorite pen, and a camera to capture any inexplicable anomalies. With each item gathered, the pull toward the unknown grew stronger, as if destiny itself was guiding me to the mansion's foreboding threshold. The drive to the mansion was an experience both eerie and surreal. The winding road, bordered by gnarled trees and shrouded in thick, creeping fog, seemed determined to lead me into a realm where the rules of nature no longer applied. Every twist and turn of the road felt like a step deeper into an ancient, unsolvable riddle, a labyrinth of time and memory that awaited my arrival. With every mile, my anticipation mingled with a creeping sense of impending doom, as if the very landscape was conspiring to ensnare me in its mysterious embrace. At last, I reached the sprawling estate. In the pale light of the approaching dawn, the Winchester Mystery House loomed before me, a vast, asymmetrical structure that appeared both timeless and decaying. Its towering turrets, hidden alcoves, and myriad windows evoked images of a bygone era, yet its presence was unnervingly modern. The mansion exuded a palpable energy, as though it were alive and aware, its every stone and shadow echoing with secrets of the past. The exterior of the house was a study in contradictions. Weathered walls, overtaken by creeping ivy and stained by the passage of time, hinted at a glorious history now marred by neglect. At the same time, the mansion's design was deliberate and intricate, its odd angles and perplexing extensions defying conventional architectural logic. As I stepped through the creaking front door, the heavy air seemed to close around me, a suffocating blend of musty decay and an indefinable, spectral presence. Inside, the mansion revealed itself as a labyrinth of wonders and terrors. The grand foyer, with its sweeping staircase and ornate tarnished chandeliers, was a paradox of splendor and desolation. Faded portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes following my every movement with silent judgment. I couldn't shake the impression that each painted gaze was a reminder of the mansion's long and troubled past, a legacy of sorrow, retribution, and secrets too dangerous to forget. I wandered along corridors that twisted unpredictably, each turn leading to rooms whose purposes were as mysterious as the house itself. There were doors that opened to barren, empty spaces, hallways that bent back upon themselves in impossible loops, and staircases that rose only to end abruptly at blank, unyielding walls. Every step was accompanied by a creak, an echo that seemed to whisper warnings or secrets, messages meant only for those willing to listen. The very architecture of the mansion appeared to be a living puzzle, meticulously designed to disorient and challenge the minds of its visitors. The deeper I ventured into the mansion, the more I sensed that the house possessed an uncanny awareness. In moments of quiet, I could almost hear hushed voices emanating from the walls. Faint, indecipherable murmurs that hinted at ancient sorrows and unfulfilled destinies. Sometimes, in the dim light, I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving just beyond the corner of my eye, vanishing whenever I turned to look. It was as though the house itself was watching me, studying my reactions, and perhaps even guiding me toward truths I was not yet ready to comprehend. Despite the oppressive aura of isolation and mystery, there were fleeting moments of strange beauty. I discovered hidden alcoves where soft ethereal light filtered through cracked stained glass windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the air. In these brief interludes, the mansion's haunting interior transformed into a sanctuary of quiet memories, echoes of laughter, whispers of love, and the silent remnants of lives long past. Yet even these moments of delicate beauty were tinged with an undercurrent of dread, a reminder that the allure of the Winchester Mystery House came at a profound cost. As I moved from room to room, I became increasingly aware of the weight of history that pressed down on me. The mansion's design was not random, but a carefully orchestrated symphony of architectural anomalies, each element a clue to a deeper, darker narrative. I recalled the legends of Sarah Winchester, a woman tormented by loss and driven by an insatiable desire to appease vengeful spirits through her endless construction. Although the accounts had been modified over the years by myth and rumor, they painted a picture of a tortured soul whose grief was so immense that she built a maze to escape the ghosts of her past. In that moment, I felt a kinship with her, a shared destiny of grappling with forces beyond mortal control. Time itself seemed to warp within the mansion. In one corridor, minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and a clock with frozen hands on the wall became a silent witness to my disoriented passage through time. The laws of nature appeared negotiable here. Daylight and darkness intermingled in surreal patterns, and the concept of time took on an eerie, fluid quality. Every creaking floorboard and every rustle of unseen movement further blurred the boundaries between reality and nightmare. I found solace in documenting my experiences in my journal. With trembling hands, I scribbled frantic notes and detailed sketches, desperate to capture the fleeting impressions of a place that seemed to shift its form with every passing moment. Each entry was an attempt to impose order on the chaos, a way to anchor my sanity amid the overwhelming uncertainty of my surroundings. Yet, even as I recorded every unusual detail, a nagging doubt persisted. Was I the master of my own fate, or had I unwittingly become a pawn in a larger, sinister game? In a quiet, forgotten wing of the mansion, I stumbled upon a small chamber hidden behind heavy, tattered drapes, dimly lit by a solitary flickering candle. The room was a repository of relics from a long-lost era. Antique photographs, faded letters, and time-worn trinkets were scattered about, each object whispering stories of love, loss, and unresolved grief. I lingered over a particularly fragile letter that recounted the tragic fate of a young woman whose life had been consumed by sorrow and isolation. Her words resonated with me, stirring emotions I had long suppressed. In that silent, lonely chamber, I felt as though I were touching the very soul of the mansion, a soul weighed down by the burdens of a tortured past. As midnight crept closer, the atmosphere in the mansion grew increasingly surreal. shadows elongated into grotesque forms that merge with the darkness, and the once familiar corridors took on an otherworldly quality. I found a secluded nook in a vast echoing parlor where an ancient piano lay silent beneath a shroud of dust. The soft strains of a long-forgotten melody, perhaps a trick of the wind or a figment of my imagination, seemed to rise from the depths of the room. In that moment, the mansion revealed its dual nature, a place where beauty and horror coexisted in a delicate, terrifying balance. I took out my journal once more, determined to record every nuance of the experience. My pen raced across the paper as I documented the inexplicable sensations, the sudden drop in temperature, the fleeting whisper of a name carried on the wind, and the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. Every written word became a lifeline, a desperate bid to capture the ephemeral magic and malevolence that surrounded me. I wrote about the surreal interplay of light and shadow, the labyrinthine passages that defied logic, and the overwhelming awareness that I was not alone in this haunted labyrinth. Then, in a moment of eerie clarity, I encountered something that sent a jolt of terror through my entire being. As I retraced my steps along a corridor lined with cracked mirrors, I caught sight of a figure standing just behind me. In the reflection, the figure appeared as a faint, ghostly outline, a presence that vanished as soon as I turned around to confront it. My heart hammered in my chest as I questioned whether the apparition was a trick of the light or a specter drawn by the mansion's ancient energy. The encounter left me with a deep, inescapable chill, as if I had momentarily brushed against the very fabric of another realm. In another wing, I discovered a study filled with dusty, time-worn books and yellowed maps chronicling the mansion's storied past. The scent of old paper and ink was almost overwhelming, evoking memories of forgotten libraries and secret archives. As I carefully examined the cryptic notes scrawled in the margins of a battered journal, I began to discern a pattern, a web of symbols and references that suggested the Winchester Mystery House was not simply an eccentric relic, but a meticulously crafted repository of historical anguish and supernatural design. Every faded line and barely legible script pointed toward a narrative of pain, loss, and a desperate bid for redemption. The mansion, I soon realized, was more than just a building. It was a living testament to the eternal struggle between hope and despair. Its twisting corridors and hidden rooms mirrored the labyrinth of the human mind, a maze of memory and emotion that could both uplift and imprison. As I roamed these halls, I felt increasingly isolated from the outside world. Despite the vastness of the mansion, I was alone, ensnared by a force that seemed determined to keep me within its enigmatic confines. Night deepened, and with it, the boundaries between reality and nightmare began to blur. I retreated to a modest, dust-laden room that the house had, for reasons unknown, prepared for me. In that quiet space, I attempted to rest, yet sleep was elusive. The gentle creaking of the ancient wood, the whisper of the wind through broken glass, and the soft rhythmic ticking of an unseen clock all conspired to keep my mind alert. Lying on the antique bed, I reflected on the day's events, the relentless pull of the mansion, and the gnawing realization that perhaps I was already entangled in a fate from which there might be no escape. Before I surrendered to fitful sleep, I decided to take one last desperate stroll through the mansion's endless halls. I passed corridors lined with cracked mirrors that distorted my reflection into something unrecognizable, an uncanny reminder that identity, like the shifting architecture around me, could be altered beyond repair. In one mirror, A fleeting glimpse of a figure standing behind me sent a shiver down my spine. A specter that vanished the moment I turned to face it. Whether it was an illusion or something more tangible, the encounter underscored the mansion's mysterious power over my perceptions. I also ventured into an airy gallery where beams of weak morning light filtered through broken stained glass. The colors danced on the walls, forming abstract patterns that seemed to tell stories of both beauty and despair. Every detail, the chipped paint, the lingering aroma of aged wood, the silent portraits that bore witness to centuries of sorrow, convinced me that this place was a repository of memories too profound for words. I realized then that the Winchester Mystery House was not merely a backdrop for ghost stories, but a character in its own right, imbued with life, mystery, and a will as relentless as the passage of time. Throughout the night and into the early hours of dawn, I documented every sensation, every inexplicable occurrence in my journal. The mansion, with all its eerie splendor, had already begun to etch itself into my soul, a dark, inescapable imprint that I feared might one day prove my undoing. In the dim light before sunrise, I resolved to continue my exploration, no matter how perilous or disorienting the path might become. I knew that each step forward was a step deeper into a labyrinth from which there might be no return. As I now pen these final lines of my first account, a single haunting thought reverberates in my mind. I have willingly stepped into a realm of secrets and specters, a place where every revelation exacts a heavy toll. The Winchester Mystery House, with its shifting corridors and relentless mysteries, has already ensnared me within its unyielding grasp. I can only wonder what further horrors await as I press onward into its depths, and whether the promise of understanding is worth the inevitable price of my freedom. With the first light of dawn breaking through the dusty windows, I close this chapter with a mix of dread and anticipation. I remain here, in this labyrinth of memories and madness, questioning the true nature of the secrets that have drawn me in. The mansion's whisper still echoes, a promise, a curse, and a challenge all at once. And as I prepare to face whatever comes next, I find myself haunted by the possibility that I may never leave these haunted halls, trapped in a perpetual dance with darkness. The pale luminescence of early dawn crept through the cracked, dusty windows of my temporary sanctuary. A cramped, forgotten room that the mansion had so thoughtfully, or perhaps malevolently, provided for my reluctant stay, as the first muted rays of sunlight attempted to dispel the remnants of night. I awoke with an inescapable sense of disquiet. The events of the previous night clung to my memory like shadows, and even now, every creak of the ancient floorboards seemed to whisper secrets that I could barely comprehend. I sat on the edge of the narrow, splintered bed, my journal open before me, with pages still damp from the frantic ink of my hurried scribbles. My mind raced with fragments of memories, fleeting images of ghostly figures, echoes of half-heard voices, and the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. The mansion, with its ever-shifting corridors and hidden recesses, had already begun to blur the boundaries between memory and reality. Determined to find some semblance of clarity, I resolved to venture deeper into the labyrinthine bowels of this confounding edifice. Leaving my makeshift room, I stepped out into a corridor that seemed even more oppressive in the weak light of dawn. The air was heavy with the scent of damp decay and something indefinably ancient, as though the very walls were steeped in the sorrow of lost generations. I could still hear the faint echo of my footsteps as I made my way along a narrow passage lined with peeling wallpaper and faded cryptic inscriptions. Each mark on the wall hinted at stories untold, a language of despair, hope, and madness intertwined. I found myself drawn toward a staircase that spiraled downward into darkness. The wooden steps, worn smooth by countless years and visitors unknown, beckoned me with an almost hypnotic allure. As I descended, the temperature dropped noticeably, and a chill that was more spiritual than physical snaked its way through my body. The low hum of the house's heartbeat, a symphony of creaks, groans, and distant whispers, grew louder, as if the mansion itself were preparing to reveal a long-hidden secret. At the foot of the stairs, I entered what appeared to be a long-forgotten library. Rows upon rows of ancient books, their spines cracked and titles faded by time, lined the walls. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of light that filtered through high, narrow windows, giving the space an ethereal quality. The silence was almost sacred here, broken only by the occasional rustle of a loose page or the soft whisper of wind seeping through unseen cracks. I wandered slowly between the towering shelves, each step stirring echoes of voices from the past. It was in this reverent hush that I first noticed the subtle interplay of light and shadow, an intricate pattern that seemed to form symbols on the worn wooden floor. My journal had become an indispensable companion in these strange surroundings, and I kneeled beside a particularly intricate set of markings, tracing my fingers along the grooves as if seeking to absorb their meaning. The symbols were a curious blend of arcane designs and what I could only describe as coded messages, cryptic instructions that hinted at a deeper purpose behind the mansion's construction. I recalled the legends of Sarah Winchester, whose grief and desperation had supposedly given birth to this maze of sorrow and wonder. Here, in the quiet heart of the library, I felt that same desperate pulse, a yearning to escape the relentless grip of fate. As I explored further, the library began to reveal its darker side. Hidden behind a massive, dust-laden tome that seemed out of place amidst the orderly rows, I discovered a narrow door, almost imperceptible against the backdrop of the ancient walls. With a mixture of trepidation and curiosity, I pushed it open and found myself in a cramped passage that spiraled off into a series of interconnected rooms. The passage was lined with mirrors, each one reflecting not only my solitary figure, but also fragments of scenes that did not belong to this world. In one, I glimpsed a family gathered in silent mourning. In another, a grand ballroom played host to a spectral dance that twirled into oblivion. The further I ventured, the more the mansion seemed to bend and twist around me, each corridor a deliberate trap designed to confound my senses. I began to suspect that the layout of this place was not the result of mere eccentric architectural whimsy, but the handiwork of a mind, or a force, driven by despair and madness. Every turn introduced me to another surreal vignette, a sunlit atrium that defied logic with its indoor garden of ghostly blooms, a dining hall where the remnants of a once opulent feast lay abandoned as if its revelers had vanished in mid-laughter, and a music room where a broken piano played a melancholy tune without any visible musician. At one point, I came upon a grand hall whose ceiling soared into darkness, its vast expanse punctuated by stained glass windows that threw kaleidoscopic patterns onto the marble floor. It was here that I encountered a presence that chilled me to the core. A woman in an antique dress, her face obscured by a veil of sorrow and regret. I couldn't tell if she was a figment of the mansion's imagination or the lingering ghost of Sarah Winchester herself, but her eyes, deep pools of despair seemed to silently plead with me. In that moment, a flood of emotions surged through me, a mingling of empathy and terror, as if I were witnessing a reflection of my own internal torment. I continued to press on, driven by an insatiable need to document every unsettling detail of this living enigma. With my journal clutched tightly in hand, I navigated a series of winding corridors that converged at a central atrium. The atrium was dominated by an enormous, decaying chandelier that hung precariously from the ceiling, its once brilliant crystals now dulled and smudged by the passage of time. Beneath it, a circular table lay set for a feast that never was, complete with tarnished silverware and faded porcelain dishes. The scene was haunting in its stillness, evoking the bittersweet memory of laughter, celebration, and ultimately loss. In a corner of the atrium, I found a small alcove adorned with a mosaic of cracked tiles that formed an intricate pattern, a labyrinth of its own, mirroring the mansion's deceptive design. As I knelt to examine the mosaic, I noticed that some of the tiles bore inscriptions in a script I couldn't decipher. The patterns seemed to pulse with a hidden energy, and I felt a magnetic pull toward them, as if they held the key to understanding the mansion's true nature. It was then that I realized the Winchester Mystery House was not just a repository of haunted relics, but a living archive of forgotten histories and unfulfilled destinies. The deeper I delved into the mansion's inner sanctum, the more I sensed that the building was alive, a sentient entity that both nurtured and imprisoned its inhabitants. The walls seemed to breathe, their surfaces shifting imperceptibly as if engaged in a slow, deliberate dance of transformation. Occasionally, I would catch a glimpse of movement in the periphery of my vision, a flash of white fabric, a whispered sigh, the soft clatter of footsteps in an empty corridor, only to find nothing upon turning around. These moments left me questioning my own sanity, as the boundary between the supernatural and my fragile human perception blurred ever further. As hours turned into what felt like an eternity, I arrived at a grand chamber dominated by a massive fireplace, its hearth cold and lifeless despite the remnants of long-extinguished embers. The room was filled with relics that spoke of an era when the mansion was vibrant with life, a faded portrait of a family whose eyes held both hope and despair, a shattered mirror that reflected 1,000 fragmented images, and a delicate music box that played a tune so hauntingly beautiful it brought tears to my eyes. I sensed that every object here was imbued with a story, a moment frozen in time, and each held a piece of the mansion's soul. In the midst of this melancholic grandeur, I began to hear whispers, soft, sibilant voices that seemed to emanate from the very air around me. They spoke in hushed tones, their words indistinct and laden with sorrow. I could not discern if they were the lamentations of lost souls or the echoes of a long-forgotten ritual. Their cadence was rhythmic, almost like a lullaby, and yet it carried with it a foreboding sense of doom. I felt as though the mansion was trying to communicate with me, urging me to uncover truths that lay buried beneath layers of myth and memory. Compelled by a mixture of dread and curiosity, I followed the ethereal murmurs to a narrow corridor draped in shadows. Here, the temperature plummeted further, and I noticed an odd, almost imperceptible vibration in the air, a subtle tremor that resonated with the beating of my heart. The corridor led to a door that was distinctly different from the others. Its surface was adorned with intricate carvings of serpentine creatures and enigmatic symbols. The carvings seemed to writhe and shift under my gaze, as if animated by a life force all their own. With a deep breath and a trembling hand, I pushed the door open. Beyond the threshold lay a chamber that defied description, a space that existed in a twilight realm between the tangible and the ephemeral. The room was vast and circular, its walls covered in murals that depicted scenes of celestial chaos and earthly despair. Figures of myth and legend intertwined in a cosmic dance, their expressions a blend of ecstasy and agony. In the center of the room stood an ornate pedestal upon which rested a single ancient key, its metallic surface edged with designs that pulsed with an otherworldly glow. As I approached, I could feel an overwhelming force pulling at the edges of my consciousness, urging me to grasp the key and unlock secrets that I was not prepared to face. In that charged moment, I hesitated, wondering if this key was a symbol of hope, a means of escape from this ever-expanding nightmare, or a sinister lure designed to deepen my entrapment. The room's energy was palpable, vibrating through every fiber of my being, and I felt as though time itself had slowed to a crawl. The soft murmur of voices, now more distinct, seemed to chant in unison, echoing the ancient refrain of fate and inevitability. With a heart pounding in both terror and anticipation, I reached out and took hold of the key. Its cool metal sent a shockwave through me, and for a fleeting instant, I was flooded with visions of a past filled with sorrow, madness, and unending construction. A past that seemed to mirror my own descent into this house's enigmatic depths. I clutched the key tightly as I retraced my steps back through the corridor, each footfall resonating with a newfound sense of urgency. The mansion no longer felt like a mere building of stone and wood. It had become a labyrinthine entity with a will of its own, intent on weaving my fate into its eternal tapestry. Every room, every hidden passage, now pulsed with the quiet hum of secrets waiting to be uncovered. I was both the observer and the observed, a reluctant participant in a grand, unfolding drama orchestrated by forces beyond my control. Exiting the chamber, I found myself once again in the heart of the mansion, where the boundaries between the living and the spectral had all but dissolved. The corridors now appeared to shift with every step I took, as if the very architecture was conspiring to disorient me. I could no longer tell if I was wandering in search of answers or being led astray by the house's relentless, cryptic will. My journal entries grew increasingly frantic, a desperate attempt to anchor my thoughts amid the surreal chaos that threatened to engulf me. Every scribbled note, every hastily drawn symbol, was a testament to my struggle against the oppressive force of the mansion. A struggle to retain a sliver of sanity in a place where reality itself seemed mutable. At length, I found a small secluded alcove off one of the twisting corridors, a brief sanctuary where I could gather my thoughts. There, in the quiet solitude, I allowed myself a moment of introspection. I pondered the nature of the key clutched in my hand and the visions that had surged through me. Was it a literal object, a relic of some forgotten ritual, or a metaphoric token meant to symbolize my inescapable bond with this haunted estate? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the mansion was not merely a passive setting. It was an active, insidious presence that sought to redefine every notion of freedom and entrapment. The very air I breathed seemed thick with predestination, as if the walls themselves whispered that my destiny was sealed the moment I crossed their threshold. As the day wore on, and the feeble sunlight gave way to a brooding afternoon gloom, I resumed my exploration with renewed determination. The mansion revealed new secrets with every step. Its corridors, seemingly reconfiguring themselves to unveil chambers that had been hidden from my previous wanderings. I discovered a long-forgotten conservatory, its glass ceiling shattered and overrun by wild, twisted vines. In the tangled greenery, fragments of old, weathered instruments lay scattered, silent witnesses to a time when music and life once flourished here. The interplay of decay and nature in that space evoked a bittersweet reminder that even in desolation, beauty could be found, though always tainted by the specter of loss. Yet, as I immersed myself in these discoveries, an ever-growing sense of inevitability began to pervade my thoughts. Each hidden room, every inexplicable phenomenon, felt like another strand in an intricate web from which there was no escape. The mansion's design, with its endless corridors and shifting spaces, now struck me not as a marvel of eccentric architecture, but as a carefully crafted prison, a maze with no exit, designed to ensnare the unwary and the curious alike. I could feel its grip tightening around me with each passing moment, a silent yet inexorable force drawing me deeper into its heart. In a final, desperate bid to understand the mansion's true nature, I made my way toward the central atrium once more. There, amid the interplay of light and shadow, I sought answers in the silent grandeur of the space. The ornate chandelier, now swaying ever so slightly despite the absence of wind, cast shimmering patterns across the floor, each beam of light like a fleeting promise of revelation. I closed my eyes for a moment, allowing the quiet hum of the house to fill my senses, and in that stillness, I felt a profound melancholy, a longing for freedom that seemed forever out of reach. As the day drew to a close and dusk began to settle, I realized with a sinking heart that I was not merely an explorer of a haunted mansion. I had become an integral part of its unfolding saga, entwined with its history and its sorrow. The key in my hand pulsed with a quiet, insistent rhythm, a reminder that the mansion had chosen me, that I was now inextricably linked to its fate. With every step, every turn of a creaking corridor, the truth became ever clearer. I was not a visitor passing through a relic of the past, but a captive in a labyrinthine prison from which there might be no escape. Now, as twilight deepened and the mansion surrendered to the encroaching darkness, I found myself standing before a large, imposing doorway. Beyond it lay what appeared to be the innermost sanctum of the house, a final uncharted territory where the promise of answers mingled with the dread of ultimate confinement. The door, wrought of heavy oak and bound in iron, seemed to vibrate with a silent, inexorable energy. I hesitated for a long moment, knowing that whatever lay beyond could either be the key to unraveling the mansion's mysteries or the point of no return in my own unraveling. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I placed my trembling hand upon the cool, rough surface of the door. In that instant, I could almost hear the mansion's heartbeat, a slow, rhythmic pulse that resonated deep within my soul, affirming the grim reality that I was no longer merely exploring this place. I was a part of it. Every step I had taken, every shadow I had encountered, had led me to this singular moment of irrevocable decision. With the key still warm in my grasp, I knew that the next step would seal my fate, binding me to the secrets and the eternal enigma of the Winchester Mystery House. I pushed the door open and crossed the threshold into the unknown, my mind a tumult of fear, wonder, and the desperate hope that somewhere within these walls lay the answer to my longing for freedom. But deep within, a gnawing certainty took hold, a realization that the further I went, the less likely it became that I would ever find my way out. In this realm of shifting shadows and silent curses, every promise of escape was but a mirage, and every revelation a further snare in the inexorable trap of fate. Now, as the last vestiges of daylight receded into a velvet darkness, and the mansion embraced me as one of its own, I could only wonder if I would ever truly leave this place. With the key in hand and the door to the unknown yawning before me, I stepped forward into the heart of the mystery, into a future written in whispers, shadows, and the unyielding, relentless will of a house that would never let go of its captive. I remember the moment I stepped into what I now call the Hall of Echoes, as if it were etched in the very fabric of my soul. The door behind me closed with a weight that resonated like finality, plunging me into a vast chamber where light and shadow performed an eternal, macabre dance. Every inch of the room whispered stories of lost time and spectral memories. The high ceiling arched overhead, decorated with faded frescoes that depicted scenes of both ecstasy and despair, their colors muted by decades of neglect. I couldn't help but feel as though I had crossed a threshold into a realm where reality had become as fractured as the myriad reflections in the ancient mirrors scattered about the room. The polished, cracked surfaces of these mirrors did more than simply reflect my image. They fractured it. In every shard and fragmented pane, I glimpsed not only my own wide, fearful eyes, but also the faint, sorrowful visages of those who had wandered these halls before me. In one mirror, I saw a woman whose eyes radiated a profound sadness, as if burdened by secrets too heavy to bear. In another, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a little girl clutching a faded doll, her expression both innocent and haunted. These images stirred an inexplicable familiarity within me, as if the house itself were reaching out to remind me of long-forgotten fragments of my own past. I moved slowly among the rows of mirrors, my steps tentative on the cold marble floor. With each forward motion, the reflections seemed to shudder, almost as if they were awakening from a deep slumber. The room was suffused with a strange, pulsating energy that made my skin crawl and my heart pound in a rhythm that mimicked the slow drip of water echoing somewhere far away. I felt as though the air around me had thickened, laden with the weight of secrets and sorrows that spanned generations. Every whispered echo, every rustle of unseen fabric, suggested that these were not mere images, but the residual essence of lives lost within these walls. At the far end of the hall, a grand mirror stood taller than the rest, its ornate frame intricately carved with symbols that I could not decipher. The craftsmanship was exquisite, yet marred by an aura of decay. As I approached, my reflection blurred and wavered, dissolving into a collage of faces and voices that merged with the static silence of the room. For a moment, I thought I saw my own eyes glisten with unshed tears as I stared into that enigmatic glass, a silent plea for understanding echoing in the depths of my mind. The sensation was overwhelming, a profound connection to the past, as if the mirror was a portal to memories buried deep within the house and within myself. My heart hammered as I reached out to touch the glass. The cool surface sent a jolt of electricity through my fingertips, and for an instant, I was overwhelmed by a torrent of disjointed images and sensations. I saw blurred flashes of a grand ball in a long-forgotten era, heard the echoing laughter of guests now turned to spectral murmurs, and felt the weight of a love lost to time. The mirror, it seemed, was not merely an object of reflection, but a living repository of every emotion, every secret the house had ever harbored. In that brief moment of contact, I sensed that the mansion was trying to communicate with me, a desperate, silent plea woven through the tapestry of its past. Stepping back, I struggled to collect my scattered thoughts. The room seemed to pulse with life, and the myriad reflections pressed in from every angle. I knew that these images were clues, remnants of the house's storied history that I had yet to fully comprehend. Each mirror was a fragment of a much larger, haunting narrative. A narrative of passion, loss, and an endless search for absolution that had condemned the souls within to wander these halls for eternity. I left the Hall of Echoes and wandered into a narrow corridor that branched off from the chamber. The corridor's walls were lined with portraits of long-departed residents, each painted with an eerie realism that made their eyes appear to follow my every move. The silent stares of these figures filled me with a sense of foreboding, as though they were silently judging my intrusion into their eternal domain. I paused before one portrait in particular, a dignified woman whose features bore an uncanny resemblance to the woman I had seen in one of the mirrors. The resemblance was so striking that for a moment I felt an inexplicable connection, as if I were staring into the face of a long-lost relative or even a part of my own soul. The corridor stretched on endlessly, its geometry as disorienting as the labyrinthine passages of the mansion itself. I began to notice subtle details that hinted at the house's insidious design. Doorways that led to dead ends, staircases that spiraled into darkness with no apparent exit, and faint scratches on the walls that resembled desperate messages from previous occupants. I traced my fingers along one of the scratches, feeling a raw, pulsing energy beneath my touch, as though the very wall were trying to convey a message in a language beyond words. The further I advanced, the more the mansion seemed to warp around me. The ambient light grew dimmer, and shadows lengthened into grotesque shapes that danced at the periphery of my vision. I could almost hear the soft, sorrowful strains of a piano, its melancholic melody echoing faintly through the corridor, a haunting serenade that evoked both longing and dread. With every step, I felt a growing compulsion to unearth the secrets hidden within this endless maze. Yet a gnawing sense of peril warned me of the price that might be paid for such revelations. In a small alcove off the corridor, I discovered an abandoned sitting room. Dusty furniture lay in disarray, as if hastily abandoned by those who once sought refuge from the relentless gloom. The room exuded an air of melancholy, its faded wallpaper peeling away like the layers of a long-forgotten memory. I sank into a threadbare armchair and allowed myself a brief moment of respite. In that stillness, I could almost feel the presence of those who had come before. A quiet assembly of souls whose unspoken tragedies lingered in the silence like a heavy, unyielding fog. Resting my head back, I closed my eyes and let the ambient murmurs of the mansion wash over me. It was in this vulnerable state that I began to sense a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as though the mansion were subtly rearranging itself in response to my presence. The silence was punctuated by the soft rustling of fabric and the distant, almost imperceptible tapping of something unseen. I opened my eyes to see a delicate, translucent figure hovering near the window. A young girl with sorrowful eyes and a dress that fluttered as if caught in an eternal breeze. Her gaze locked with mine, and in that fleeting moment, I felt an overwhelming sadness that transcended the boundaries of time. Was she a remnant of a lost soul, or merely a figment conjured by the haunted atmosphere? I could not say, but her presence deepened the sense of isolation that now clutched at my heart. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and the need to understand the mansion's labyrinthine design, I resolved to follow the spectral figure. I left the sitting room and trailed her through a series of twisting corridors. Each step I took felt laden with significance, as though I were following a thread that would unravel the very essence of this accursed estate. The corridors converged at a grand, circular hall dominated by an enormous antique clock. The clock's hands were frozen at an unholy hour, its face cracked and barely legible. The silence in the hall was oppressive, broken only by the soft rustle of unseen movements and the distant echoes of a melody that seemed to emanate from deep within the walls. In the center of the hall stood a massive table, its surface scarred by the passage of time and the weight of untold secrets. Upon the table lay an assortment of objects, a rusted locket, a tarnished pocket watch, and a faded photograph of a family whose eyes seemed to plead for salvation. As I examined the photograph, I could almost feel the collective despair of the family radiating from the image. Each object was imbued with its own story, fragments of a puzzle that I was desperate to piece together. The spectral girl, now a mere whisper in the periphery, had vanished, leaving me alone with the relics of the past. I spent what felt like hours meticulously studying each artifact, my journal open on my lap as I recorded every minute detail. The room seemed to close in around me, and the passage of time became as fluid and elusive as the memories trapped within the relics. It was then that I heard a sound, a soft rhythmic tapping that reverberated through the hall. The sound grew steadily louder, as if a hidden presence was marching closer with deliberate intent. My pulse quickened, and I clutched the locket tightly, feeling the chill of dread seep into my bones. With trepidation, I followed the sound to a concealed door hidden behind an elaborately carved tapestry. The tapestry depicted a scene of celestial conflict, a battle between light and darkness that mirrored the eternal struggle within the mansion itself. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly pulled the heavy fabric aside, revealing a narrow doorway that led into a long-forgotten passage. The air beyond was dense and heavy, and the rhythmic tapping now seemed to emanate from deep within the passage's darkness. As I ventured into the corridor, the temperature dropped precipitously, and my breath became visible in the dim light. Every step was accompanied by the sound of my own cautious footfalls and the unrelenting beat of that mysterious tapping, a sound that now resembled the pulse of a living, malevolent force. The walls were adorned with faded murals depicting scenes of torment and despair, their colors distorted by the relentless passage of time. In these images, I recognized a recurring motif: a solitary figure wandering amidst a sea of sorrow, eyes hollow yet determined, a reflection of my own growing isolation. The corridor opened into a vast, cavernous space that defied conventional description. A subterranean vault where time itself appeared to have fractured. Here, the tapping reached a crescendo, resonating off the stone walls and mingling with the low hum of ancient machinery that I could neither see nor understand. In the center of this vault stood an elaborate contraption, a massive clockwork mechanism whose gears and cogs spun with an eerie, hypnotic precision. The sound, I realized, was produced by the mechanical heartbeat of the mansion itself, a rhythm that both governed and imprisoned every soul within its walls. My eyes were drawn to a delicate, handwritten inscription etched into a nearby stone slab. The inscription spoke of a covenant, a promise made in blood and sorrow that bound the mansion and its inhabitants to a fate beyond mortal reckoning. It hinted that the house was not merely a structure, but a sentient force, its every creak and whisper a testament to the eternal cycle of hope and despair. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read those words, knowing that my own fate was now inextricably linked to the dark promise contained within them. As I stood before the clockwork mechanism, the overwhelming sense of dread intensified. It was as if the mansion were reminding me that every secret I uncovered came at a price. Every truth revealed was steeped in the bitter taste of irrevocable loss. The tapping, now a relentless drumbeat, echoed the rhythm of my own heart, a grim cadence that foretold of the inescapable destiny that awaited me. I knew that the deeper I delved into these hidden recesses, the more I risked losing not only my sanity, but my very self. In a moment of desperate resolve, I decided to document this discovery in my journal, my hand trembling as I wrote down the inscription's cryptic verses and the details of the mechanism before me. Every word I penned was an attempt to assert control in a place where the boundaries between reality and nightmare were dissolving before my eyes. I could feel the mansion's gaze upon me, as though its myriad eyes, both living and spectral, were bearing witness to my struggle against the inexorable pull of fate. I left the subterranean vault with a heavy heart and a mind swirling with unanswered questions. The mechanical heartbeat of the house continued to reverberate in my ears, a constant reminder of the relentless force that bound me to this place. As I retraced my steps through winding corridors and through rooms that defied the very logic of space and time, I could no longer ignore the haunting realization that each step brought me closer to a truth too terrible to imagine. The mansion's layout began to shift in subtle, disconcerting ways, as if it were actively rewriting its own history. Hallways that had once led to grand ballrooms now terminated in dead ends filled with crumbling relics. Doors that promised escape only revealed further passages into labyrinths of despair. I began to notice that my journal entries, once a beacon of clarity, now felt fragmented and disjointed, mirroring the splintered reflections of the mirrors I had left behind. Each scribbled note and hastily drawn diagram was an attempt to impose order on a chaos that defied explanation. Night fell once more, and with it came a suffocating darkness that swallowed every trace of light. I sought refuge in a small chamber at the far end of a narrow corridor, a room that seemed untouched by time, its walls lined with faded wallpaper and a single dim lamp that cast elongated dancing shadows. Here, in the oppressive solitude, I allowed my mind to wander through the labyrinth of memories and reflections that the mansion had imposed upon me. I recalled the spectral girl's sorrowful eyes, the anguished faces in the mirrors, and the relentless ticking of that ancient clockwork heart. Each memory was a shard of a broken mirror, a fragment of a past that I could not fully reclaim. Sleep eluded me that night as I lay awake, haunted by the relentless cadence of the mansion's pulse. In the quiet moments between waking and dreaming, I began to perceive a pattern, a subtle rhythm in the chaos that hinted at a greater design, a purpose that lay beyond the surface of fear and despair. I wondered if the house itself was trying to communicate something profound, a final, desperate plea for liberation, or perhaps a declaration of eternal captivity. My thoughts turned to the inscription and the covenant it spoke of, and I felt the crushing inevitability of a fate sealed long before my arrival. As dawn crept in through the cracks of the chamber's old window, I rose with a profound sense of both determination and resignation. The mansion had revealed its fractured soul to me in shattered mirrors and echoing hallways, and I knew that my journey had taken me deeper into its enigmatic heart. With a heavy heart and trembling resolve, I gathered my journal and prepared to venture further into the labyrinth, into spaces where the past and present collided in a relentless dance of sorrow and terror. Every step, every whispered secret, every spectral image imprinted itself upon me, weaving an intricate tapestry of memory and despair. I could no longer discern where my own identity ended and the mansion's haunted legacy began. In that blurred line between self and structure, I sensed the inexorable truth. The house was alive, its ancient heart beating in rhythm with my own, binding me to its eternal labyrinth. With the rising sun casting a feeble glow upon the decaying grandeur of the corridors, I stepped forward once again, determined to uncover the final truths that lay hidden within these walls, even if that journey led me to confront the most harrowing depths of my own soul. As I moved through the mansion, I could feel the eyes of countless ghosts, long silenced and forgotten, watching me with a mixture of pity and inevitability. Their silent vigil reminded me that, in this place, every revelation was inextricably tied to a sacrifice, and every attempt at escape only deepened the bonds of my imprisonment. I pressed on, the echo of my footsteps merging with the mansion's mechanical pulse, a pulse that now seemed to synchronize with the very rhythm of my heart. And with every step, I felt the cold, inescapable truth. The further I ventured into the depths of this spectral labyrinth, the more I became entangled in a destiny from which there might be no return. As the inky veil of night reclaimed the mansion, I felt the oppressive weight of its presence deepening with every step I took. The corridors, which had once whispered half-forgotten memories, now roared with an unyielding intensity that threatened to shatter my fragile grasp on reality. I found myself wandering through passages that twisted and overlapped in impossible geometries, where each turn seemed to lead me not forward, but deeper into a dark chasm of despair and confusion. The familiar creak of the ancient floorboards underfoot echoed like a somber heartbeat, a rhythmic reminder that I was not alone. In the distance, soft, almost imperceptible murmurs resonated through the walls, their syllables blending into a haunting litany that both beckoned and warned me. At times, I paused to listen, straining to decipher words lost in the static of time, only to be met with silence that was more deafening than any sound. It was as if the house itself was speaking to me, its voice a disembodied chorus of sorrow and menace. I pressed on, guided by an instinctual pull toward a section of the mansion that I had not yet explored. The corridor ahead narrowed, its walls slick with dampness and stained by the slow seep of decay. Shadows writhed along the edges, taking on shapes that hinted at tormented souls reaching out for salvation or retribution. The ambient light from a lone, sputtering wall sconce cast long, distorted silhouettes that danced erratically, making me question whether they were merely tricks of light or something far more sinister. In a moment of uneasy clarity, I realized that the passage I was traversing was lined with portraits of individuals whose eyes seemed to glow with a spectral luminescence. Their faces were etched with the anguish of 1,000 lost years, their stares imbued with the knowledge of secrets far beyond my understanding. I could not help but feel that these souls, bound eternally to the mansion, were silently observing my every move. Each portrait, framed in decaying gold leaf, appeared to shift imperceptibly, as if the expressions on their faces changed with the ebb and flow of my own heartbeat. Driven by a mix of dread and an insatiable need to uncover the mansion's mysteries, I followed a narrow flight of stairs that spiraled downward into what I could only describe as the underbelly of the estate. The air grew colder with every step, and a palpable mist began to curl around my ankles, as though the very essence of the house was seeping into my skin. The low hum of ancient unseen machinery, a sound that seemed both mechanical and spectral, vibrated through the stone walls, syncing with the tremors of my racing pulse. At the base of the stairs, I discovered a vast chamber that defied both logic and time. The space was dominated by a massive, crumbling mosaic that stretched across the floor like a map of forgotten civilizations. Each tessera was a fragment of a larger, indecipherable pattern, its colors faded yet stubbornly vivid against the encroaching decay. As I knelt to study the mosaic, I noticed that some pieces had been deliberately removed, leaving gaping voids that seemed to pulse with an eerie inner light. The mosaic felt like a coded message, a story of anguish and betrayal etched into the very foundation of the mansion. My fingers brushed against the cold stone as I traced the contours of the missing pieces, and with that touch came a rush of fragmented memories. I saw, in fleeting visions, scenes of desperation and violence. A family huddled in terror, a lone figure weeping amid shattered dreams, and a door that slammed shut on the promise of escape. The images overwhelmed me, blurring the line between past and present, reality and nightmare. I scrambled to steady my breathing, my journal clutched tightly in one hand, as I fought to document the surge of emotion and revelation that threatened to engulf me. An unsettling sensation of being watched gripped me as I rose and continued deeper into the labyrinth. The walls of the chamber began to reverberate with a low, mournful chant, a dirge that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the mansion. With each measured step, the chant grew louder, evolving into a cacophony of voices that swirled around me like a vortex of despair. It was not merely sound, but a manifestation of the house's collective grief and fury. A relentless reminder that I was trespassing on sacred ground, a space where time had become malleable and souls were ensnared in perpetual torment. The corridor beyond the mosaic led me to a narrow passage flanked by intricate wood carvings that depicted scenes of celestial conflict and human frailty. I ran my hand along the smooth, time-worn surface, feeling the deep grooves that had been carved with painstaking care. The carvings seemed to shift under my touch, their images morphing into expressions of anguish and ecstasy. In one fleeting moment, I believed I saw the figure of a young woman, a mirror of my own sorrow, etched into the wood, her eyes filled with a silent plea for redemption. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me with a lingering sense of foreboding. Beyond the passage, a door of ornate iron and darkened wood beckoned me forward. It stood slightly ajar, a thin sliver of golden light seeping out as if from a secret sanctum beyond. With a mix of trepidation and resolute determination, I pushed the door open and stepped into a room that exuded an atmosphere of tragic grandeur. The chamber was vast, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow, and its walls draped in heavy velvet curtains that bore intricate, almost hypnotic patterns. A grand, dust-covered piano occupied one corner, its keys stained with the passage of unspoken years. The entire room pulsed with the sorrow of lives long extinguished, a tangible lament that filled the air with a bitter sweetness. In the center of the chamber, atop a marble pedestal, lay a weathered diary bound in cracked leather. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, yet the ink within remained strangely vibrant. A series of desperate confessions and cryptic warnings that hinted at unspeakable horrors. I reached out with trembling fingers and opened the diary, each word a lifeline to a past steeped in anguish and mystery. The diary recounted the tale of a family cursed by grief, their fates inexorably intertwined with the mansion's own tragic destiny. As I read, a chill crawled along my spine, for the entries spoke of a ritual, a binding of souls that had doomed the inhabitants of this house to wander its halls for eternity. The narrative within the diary resonated deeply with the disquiet that had been gnawing at my consciousness. I realized, with a dawning horror, that the mansion was not merely a repository of haunted relics, but a living, breathing prison constructed by forces both human and supernatural. Every secret uncovered was another shackle, another link in the chain that bound me to this place. The words on the fragile pages became a mirror reflecting my own plight. And with each sentence I read, I felt a tightening grip around my heart, a premonition of a fate from which there might be no deliverance. I closed the diary gently, as if the very act might shatter the fragile balance between hope and despair that held me together. The room grew oppressively silent, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to simply exist amid the ghosts of the past. But the silence was deceptive, a calm before the storm that I sensed was imminent. The walls began to tremble with an unseen force, and the heavy drapes billowed as if stirred by a wind not born of nature. The mansion was shifting once again, rearranging itself in a macabre dance that defied logic. A sudden piercing sound, a cry of anguish or perhaps a final resigned whisper, cut through the stillness, jolting me from my reverie. I spun around, my eyes wide with terror, trying to locate the source of the sound in the labyrinth of shadows. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, yet a morbid curiosity held me in place. The sound seemed to emanate from behind a heavy, carved door that I had not noticed before, its surface etched with symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. With trembling resolve, I approached and pushed the door open, unsure if what lay beyond was the salvation I so desperately sought, or another trap set by the mansion's insidious design. Beyond the door was a small antechamber, its air thick with the metallic scent of blood and rust. The room was adorned with relics of past lives, tattered photographs, broken jewelry, and faded letters strewn about as if discarded in a moment of despair. In one corner, a mirror leaned precariously against a wall, its surface fractured into a mosaic of jagged shards. I approached it cautiously, and as I peered into its depths, I saw not only my own trembling reflection, but also a montage of faces contorted in silent agony. Each visage told a story of unfulfilled dreams and endless suffering, a stark reminder that the mansion had claimed countless souls long before I had arrived. The oppressive aura of the antechamber weighed heavily on me, and I felt an overwhelming compulsion to record every detail in my journal. I scribbled hurried notes, trying to capture the essence of the sorrow and terror that permeated every inch of the space. It was then that I noticed an inscription on the wall, scrawled in a language that seemed both ancient and disturbingly familiar. The characters glowed with an otherworldly light, and as I read them aloud in a hushed whisper, the room shuddered as if in response. The inscription spoke of an eternal cycle, a binding curse that condemned the soul of anyone who dared to unearth the mansion's secrets. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. Every step I had taken, every secret I had uncovered, was drawing me ever closer to a fate from which there could be no escape. As I stood there, the cold, unyielding truth began to settle in the recesses of my mind. The mansion was alive, not merely as a structure, but as an entity with its own will, a relentless force that had ensnared the hopes and dreams of all who had entered its domain. I felt the weight of countless lives, their stories etched into the very walls around me, merging with my own narrative in a tapestry of despair. With each breath, the mansion seemed to tighten its grip, whispering promises of knowledge and doom in equal measure. I stepped back from the mirror, my heart pounding with the dual sensations of terror and inevitability. The path forward was shrouded in darkness, and yet the allure of understanding, of breaking free of the curse, beckoned me onward. I knew that the deeper I ventured, the more I risked losing not only my sanity, but my very self. And yet, in the midst of this despair, a small spark of defiance still burned within me, a stubborn, fragile hope that I could uncover the truth and perhaps find a way to shatter the chains that bound me. I resumed my journey, guided by the spectral echoes of voices long silenced and the mournful rhythm of the mansion's heartbeat. The corridors twisted and overlapped in dizzying patterns, each step a descent into an abyss from which I feared there might be no return. The distant strains of a melancholy piano, the rustling of tattered fabrics, and the faint murmur of despairing souls wove together into a symphony of sorrow that accompanied me on my relentless march through this labyrinth of anguish. Every doorway I passed, every secret chamber I explored, only deepened the haunting realization that I was becoming an intrinsic part of this accursed edifice, a living testament to its tragic history. In that crushing moment of awareness, as I stood amid the swirling gloom of a long-forgotten hall, I sensed that my destiny was inexorably entwined with the mansion's own tortured legacy. I was no longer a mere visitor. I was a captive soul, bound by the mansion's relentless will, inching closer to an ending I could neither escape nor deny. I stepped through a doorway I had never noticed before, a narrow, iron-bound portal that seemed to exude an almost palpable despair. The air beyond was heavier than any I had ever experienced, dense with a silent promise of finality. As I crossed the threshold, the mansion's corridor shifted with an unsettling determination. The very floor beneath my feet felt as if it were alive, pulsating with a cold rhythm that matched the beating of my terrified heart. Every step I took led me deeper into an architectural nightmare where the rules of space and time unraveled like thread from an old tapestry. At first, I tried to convince myself that there must be a way out, a hidden exit behind one of the countless doors, or a secret passage that would lead me back into the world I once knew. I ran down long, twisting hallways, my breath coming in ragged gasps, convinced that I could escape the oppressive grip of the Winchester Mystery House. Yet every time I reached what I thought was an exit, I was met with an uncanny illusion, a mirror that reflected not freedom, but an endless corridor identical to the one I had just left, or a door that swung open to reveal only another labyrinth of shadowed passageways. It was as if the house itself was mocking my every desperate attempt at escape. I remember the moment vividly, my pulse racing as I flung open a heavy oak door, expecting to find a glimpse of the outside world. Instead, I was confronted with a room that bore every mark of the mansion's eerie design. High ceilings shrouded in gloom, walls that bled with creeping ivy and old secrets, and a single, dimly lit window that revealed nothing but the oppressive darkness of an unyielding night. I pressed my hand against the cold glass, willing it to shatter or at least yield a crack of moonlight, but the window remained as impenetrable as the truth I was beginning to fear. In those moments of frantic searching, I began to notice a sinister pattern in the mansion's design. Corridors looped back on themselves in impossible ways. Doors that I had entered earlier would reappear, as if the mansion were a living maze, designed to entrap and confound any who dared traverse its halls. I began to question the very nature of reality here. Was the house simply bending space, or was it rewriting my memories, erasing any hope of escape? With every turn and every mirrored reflection, the line between my own recollections and the mansion's dark legacy blurred, until I could no longer tell where I ended and the house began. Late one evening, if it could even be called evening in a place where time had lost its meaning, I found myself in a vast antechamber filled with relics of lives long past. The room was silent except for the low hum of machinery hidden within the walls and the soft creaks of settling wood. I knelt beside a dusty table where a faded photograph of a smiling family stared back at me with hollow eyes. Their faces were etched with a sorrow that resonated deep within me, a sorrow that I recognized as my own. The realization struck me like a thunderbolt. I was no longer just an intruder in this house. I was becoming part of its tragic tapestry, woven into the very fabric of its existence. As I wandered further into the mansion's heart, I began to hear voices, whispers that mingled with the rustle of ancient drapes and the distant mournful strains of a piano. The voices spoke of promises and curses, of eternal bonds and forgotten dreams. They told me tales of previous souls who had once dared to challenge the mansion's insidious embrace, only to find themselves lost in its endless corridors. In one such murmur, I heard a name repeated softly, a name that echoed my own. The spectral chorus of voices began to coalesce into a single haunting refrain. You belong here. It was a sound that sent shivers coursing down my spine, as if the very mansion were speaking directly to me, sealing my fate with every syllable. Desperation gave way to a profound, creeping realization as I explored a narrow, windowless corridor that seemed to stretch on forever. Every step forward felt predestined, as if I were following a path laid out long before I had ever set foot in this cursed estate. I reached a dead end, a small enclosed room with walls covered in intricate archaic symbols. In the center of the room, a dusty mirror hung crookedly on the wall. I approached it, drawn by a force I could neither understand nor resist, and gazed into the glass. At first, I saw only my own terrified reflection, but gradually, the image began to change. The lines of my face blurred and merged with those of a woman I did not recognize. A woman with eyes that held the sorrow of centuries and a smile that was both tragic and resigned. In that moment, the horrifying truth became undeniable. The eyes in the mirror were not mine alone. They were the eyes of every lost soul who had ever been claimed by this house, and now they stared back at me with the same resigned acceptance I was only beginning to comprehend. I staggered back, my mind reeling as the full weight of my predicament crashed upon me. I had always thought of myself as an explorer, an intrepid seeker of hidden truths. But now I understood that the Winchester Mystery House was not a mere relic of eccentric architecture. It was a living, breathing prison meticulously constructed to trap the desperate, the curious, and the lost. Every twist in its corridors, every inexplicable shadow, every echo of a long-forgotten lament was designed to keep me tethered to its haunted core. The realization was as crushing as it was inevitable. I was trapped here, condemned to wander these ever-changing halls for all eternity. In a final, desperate bid to escape the maddening labyrinth, I retraced my steps to the grand foyer, the heart of the mansion where my journey had begun. I recalled the day I had arrived, driven by a mix of curiosity and a hunger for mystery. But as I entered the foyer, the familiar splendor of the space was marred by an unbearable emptiness. The grand staircase that once promised a way upward now loomed before me like a monument to my failure, its steps swallowed by an impenetrable darkness. Every ornate detail of the room, from the faded portraits on the walls to the cracked marble floor, seemed to mock my futile attempts at liberation. I wandered aimlessly, calling out for help, for any sign of life beyond these cursed walls. But my voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. Time, it seemed, had lost all meaning here. I no longer knew how many days or years had passed since I first crossed the mansion's threshold. Each moment bled into the next, an endless cycle of despair and fruitless hope. I began to understand that the house was not merely an architectural anomaly. It was a sentient being with a will of its own, a dark force that fed on the longing and despair of its prisoners. The mansion's design was not random, but a carefully orchestrated trap, a masterful illusion from which there was no escape. The final blow came on a night when the mansion's very walls seemed to weep with sorrow. I had taken refuge in a small chamber, hoping that sleep might bring some clarity or, perhaps, an end to this relentless nightmare. Instead, I was plagued by visions of endless corridors and shadowy figures, reflections of every soul that had ever been consumed by this place. In a moment of tortured lucidity, I awoke to a realization so profound and horrifying that it shattered the last vestiges of hope. I was not the first to be ensnared by this house, and I would not be the last. I was merely the latest victim in an unending cycle of despair, a thread woven into a tapestry of eternal entrapment. As the truth crystallized in my mind, I began to see the mansion for what it truly was, a living, malevolent entity that feasted on the souls of those who dared to seek its secrets. Every echo, every creak of wood, every whisper in the dark was a reminder of my inescapable fate. I had become a part of its history, my existence now inseparable from the cursed legacy of the Winchester Mystery House. There was no escape, no salvation waiting beyond these haunted walls. The very structure of the house had conspired to imprison me, its corridors looping endlessly like the tendrils of a dark, insidious labyrinth from which there could be no exit. I sank to my knees in the center of the grand foyer, my journal falling from my grasp as I stared blankly into the void. The oppressive realization that I was now a permanent resident of this nightmare filled me with a cold, paralyzing dread. The mansion's heartbeat, once a distant, ominous thrum, now pounded in my ears with a relentless finality. I felt its presence in every corner of my mind, a constant reminder that I had been claimed by forces beyond my control. The echoes of past souls mingled with the beating of my heart, each pulse a dirge for the life I once knew. In that moment, a voice, soft, sorrowful, and achingly familiar, whispered from the darkness, "You belong here." It was not the voice of an external ghost, but rather the culmination of every fear, every regret, every longing that had ever haunted me. It was the voice of the mansion itself, speaking through the filter of my own despair. And as I listened, the truth became undeniable. I was no longer an outsider. I had become one with the house. The realization washed over me in a tidal wave of emotion, a devastating, soul-crushing clarity that left no room for denial. I was forever trapped within these cursed walls, destined to wander the endless corridors of the Winchester Mystery House for all eternity. As I slowly rose to my feet, a surreal calm settled over me, a resignation born not of defeat, but of an inescapable truth. The mansion, in all its spectral majesty and relentless despair, had claimed me completely. Every corridor I had walked, every door I had opened had led to this final, unalterable fate. I gazed into the vast expanse of the grand foyer one last time, now seeing it not as a place of eerie beauty, but as the altar upon which my freedom had been sacrificed. My reflection in a nearby tarnished mirror revealed eyes that no longer held hope, but rather the quiet acceptance of a soul condemned. In that final, heart-wrenching moment of clarity, I understood that the Winchester Mystery House was not a mere building. It was a living repository of despair, an eternal prison for lost souls. I was not an adventurer who had simply lost her way. I was now a permanent part of its macabre history. The mansion's corridors would continue to shift and whisper secrets long after I had been forgotten by the world outside. I had become one with the endless maze, a ghost among ghosts, a story that would be told in hushed tones by those unfortunate enough to cross its threshold in the future. There was no dramatic exit, no final burst of courage to break the cycle. Instead, I embraced the inevitability of my fate with a sorrowful acceptance. I had spent so long searching for meaning in the echoes and shadows, only to find that every answer led me deeper into a labyrinth with no door out. The realization was both excruciating and strangely liberating. For the first time, I ceased fighting against the inevitable. I surrendered to the mansion's eternal embrace. Now, as I record these final trembling words in my journal, a futile attempt to leave a trace of my existence, I know that they will serve only as a warning to any future wanderers who might dare to unravel the mysteries of this place. The Winchester Mystery House is not a monument to history or a relic of a bygone era. It is a living curse, a relentless force that claims the souls of the curious and the desperate. And I, Amelia, have become its most recent captive, doomed to wander its shifting halls, forever ensnared by the dark promise of an inescapable eternity. In the silent aftermath of this revelation, as the mansion's heartbeat fades into a steady, unyielding drone, I close my eyes for the final time, not in death, but in the slow, agonizing acceptance of a fate from which there is no reprieve. I am one with this house now, my existence a mere echo in its endless corridors, a testament to the relentless, suffocating power of a place that refuses to let go of its prisoners. And so, in this final twist of bitter irony, I realize that the true horror was never in the ghosts or the legends. It was in the quiet, inexorable truth that I was trapped here forevermore.